I'm joined now by Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So we've seen that Mike Johnson has refused for over 3 weeks now to seat Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. You've now taken action against Mike Johnson. Can you explain what's being done in court?
Yeah, so we are right now, as we film this and tape this, we are working on a lawsuit, essentially demand that Mike Johnson seat Adelita Grijalva. I am coming to you not far from her district, actually. And as you know, Mike Johnson has refused to seat the duly elected representative from the 7th District of Arizona. Not sure what his motives are for that. Could be, as many have speculated, that he doesn't want her to be the final vote on the Epstein files discharge petition. Perhaps it's for other partisan reasons, but whatever it is, he is denying the state of Arizona and the more than 800,000 people who live in the 7th District of their right to representation. And that is called taxation without representation. And we fought a revolutionary war over that issue, Brian, and I'm going to file a lawsuit to prevent it from happening anymore.
He is pointing to this and he's saying that he's merely just following the Pelosi precedent. Now, what he's not saying is that when Nancy Pelosi waited 25 days to swear in an elected official, it's because that elected official chose a specific date unto themselves. Adelita Grijalva is begging to be sworn in right now, has been begging to be sworn in, and so Mike Johnson won't do it. So not exactly the Pelosi precedent here, but what does it say that he is trying to deflect and take attention off of himself by instead saying, this isn't my doing, it's the fault of the Democrats?
Yeah, I mean that was like the fifth or sixth or seventh different excuse that he had come up with
Yeah.
for not swearing Adelita in, and just bizarre, as you pointed out. In that case, they had prearranged a date, um, and Adelita has been in the Capitol once or twice already. It's my understanding she's headed back to the Capitol tomorrow. He has had ample opportunity in any of these pro forma sessions to swear her in. And, it's absurd because, of course, he's already sworn in, even this year, two Republican members of Congress in pro forma sessions right after they were elected. And, in this case, not only has she already been elected by 70% of the vote, but we certified her election, the governor and I and the Secretary of State, last week. So, Brian, time is more than up, and we're going to have to solve this in the courts, I guess.
Is there a specific statute that you can rely on, impending court case? And the reason I ask that is because so much, I think, of we're learning now, so much of what has fueled and upheld our democracy up to this point has been a reliance on norms and both parties participating in democracy because both parties are equal players in democracy. We've seen more and more that Republicans are not especially interested in being good partners in democratic governance because they're not very interested in upholding democracy. It's more about consolidating power for themselves. And so are there specific statutes that would bolster these claims that Adelita Grijalva need to be sworn in right now? Or has all this time, 250 some odd years, been just a reliance on norms to make sure that all of this is done right?
Yeah, I mean, well, you will see that in our filing that will be, coming hopefully in the next day or two. I would anticipate filing no later than tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, the Constitution is one, and it makes it very clear that when a representative is elected, that person is to be seated, and no House Speaker or House rule can supersede the United States Constitution. We also have case law, supportive case law. I believe a case called Powell that you will see in our filing that supports us. So we feel really good. We're on strong footing here, Brian, in terms of the litigation that we're about to file. Yes, of course, the House has its rules, but those rules cannot be weaponized and used to violate the Constitution and to violate the rights of 813,000 Arizonans, So, you could play this out to a very, very bad situation a year from now if this is allowed to
Right.
happen, right? If Mike Johnson now thinks that he's the king of the world and the king of the country, along with Donald Trump, apparently, and he gets to decide who gets seated in Congress, think about how insane that would be, and what a terrible precedent that would set.
And that's exactly what I want to discuss right now is how could this situation serve as a microcosm for a broader willingness from the Republican Party as we look toward 2026 and 2028, kind of them testing the fence right now to see where it's weakest in terms of simply not seating any Democrats because they feel unto themselves that Democrats are not entitled to have any power.
Yeah, that's the scary part of all this. And then that is why we think it's so important to go to court to lay down this marker and to get a court to confirm that no House Speaker can do this to our country and to hundreds of thousands of people in any given state, or in the case of the House next in 2026, if Democrats retake the House or whatever happens, that they can't deny the seating of representatives. And I think it's important, and look, I mean, they've been willing to try to do things like this in the past. Let's go back to 2020 when they tried to undermine an entire election in 2020. This seems to be a trend where Republicans are willing to violate the Constitution and to violate laws in order to seize and hold power. And thank God that didn't happen in 2020. But we're not going to allow it to happen in 2026 or 2028. And that's why we are so resolute in filing this lawsuit. And Brian, I want to also reiterate why this is so important for these actual constituents and the people of the seventh district. Adelita Grijalva hasn't even been given an email address. She cannot serve her constituents. She can't advocate for the flooding victims in her district. She cannot advocate for their Social Security. She can't advocate for veterans benefits. So there's a whole host of things that, despite everything that Mike Johnson keeps saying about how she's not working for her district, which is of course absurd, she can't work for her district because she has not been sworn in yet and can't vote and can't act officially.
You had mentioned obviously 2020 and Trump's unwillingness to allow those elections to be certified or those results to be certified. We also saw it at the hands of Kari Lake in 2022 in your state of Arizona. We saw it in just this past year in North Carolina, where Jefferson Griffin tried to disqualify 60,000 ballots just from blue counties because he didn't want he wanted to be seated on the North Carolina Supreme Court and didn't want Allison Riggs' election to be certified. And so what is your broader reaction to the fact that increasingly, whether it's Trump, whether it's gubernatorial candidates, whether it's even state Supreme Court candidates, they are viewing Democrats' election wins as illegitimate just by virtue of the fact that they are Democrats?
Yeah, and I think that pattern is very clearly developing, and and it should really alarm all of us. And I think that what we have to do as AGs, what I would say is what we plan to do is what we have been doing, which is whenever the Republicans, and it has just been the Republicans, violate the Constitution or try to undermine an election or try to interfere in an election, you make the case that's what's happening right here to Adelita Grijalva. They are interfering with her right to be seated after an election. What we have to do is robustly and immediately and swiftly respond in the courts if necessary, because if left unabated, they will get away with it, and they will continue to be emboldened to try everything that you just mentioned.
How are you working with other state attorneys general, just in a broader context, to push back against the overreach of this administration? And kind of as a follow-up to that question, are there Republican AGs who recognize that this administration is trying to usurp authority that it doesn't have?
Well, I'll tell you what, I wish I could answer that there were. To answer your second question, I really wish there were. I don't believe really we've had a single AG, Republican AG, join us in the litigation against the Trump administration. That I may be wrong. There maybe have been one instance. I'd have to go back and check. Really, they have not. So here in Arizona, we have sued Donald Trump along with the other Democratic AGs 27 times. And everything from birthright citizenship to push back on that horrible executive order, to the tariffs lawsuit, which I'm co-leading with Dan Rayfield in Oregon, to the federal funding freeze, and we added up those 27 lawsuits, Brian, and found that in Arizona, we have saved Arizonans $1.5 billion because they wanted to do the federal funding freeze. They wanted to defund Head Start. They wanted to defund Meals on Wheels. They wanted to destroy AmeriCorps. They wanted to destroy our education funding and not send it to Arizona. So it really matters that you have an AG who's willing to stand up for you as a state, which is why these AG races are going to be so important and always have been, but especially important in 2026.
And finally, as we look at these troop deployments that are happening around the country, is there some sense among the AGs that it's not just about being able to deploy these troops right now? I don't particularly think that Trump is moved by this idea of crime in cities. What I presume he's doing this for is to give himself some legal pretext so that in November of 26 or November of 28, he then has that framework he can rely on to deploy the troops, where those troops can basically serve as his boots on the ground to be able to do whatever he wants to do come election time. We know based on 2020 that he tried to seize the voting machines in Georgia. He wasn't able to do that. He didn't have boots on the ground to be able to effectuate those plans. And frankly, he didn't have buy-in from the law enforcement agencies, but Bill Barr is gone and Pam Bondi is in. And Pam Bondi is there not just because she's not going to serve as a barrier to his attempts to interfere in the election, but because she is an election denier. Same with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. So there's no pushback at the agency side. But then if he has troops on the ground to be able to do this, he has people who can effectuate these plans on his behalf. And so how does that sense kind of manifest itself among the AG community?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that your theory is a legitimate one, and I think it's a scary one. Trump has, attempted to deploy the National Guard and the military in some cases, in Portland and in Chicago and in Los Angeles, and the Democratic AGs have all been pushing back against that because it's not only unconstitutional, but it would set a very dangerous precedent going forward. And I think you raise a really interesting point, which is that it is not supported by local law enforcement. I can tell you that local law enforcement, whether it's sheriffs or police chiefs, do not believe that we need these troops in our streets. They've got it covered, and we certainly don't want these troops in our streets trying to intimidate people, trying to interfere with elections, if you're right and that's what their plan is. But it makes it all the more important for the AGs to be standing up robustly against this deployment of these troops right now, all the way through 2028. If that is their plan, to try to use these troops in some sort of completely unconstitutional way related to our elections.
We'll leave it there. Attorney General Mays, thanks so much for taking the time today and for the work you're doing.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.